5 posters down, 5 more to go. We're officially halfway through the 10 posters, 10 design styles challenge. If you've missed the first half, we've already tackled everything from minimalism to flat art. And I'm starting to see my creative voice emerge. But the hardest styles are still ahead. In this video, I'm tackling the most complex and difficult styles yet. This is the final stretch to see if I can find a style that actually feels like me. It's either going to be a creative breakthrough or a total burnout. Let's start the 6th poster with a bang. Pop art. Pop art exploded in the 1950s by blurring the lines between high art and mundane consumer culture. Think Andy Warhol's soup cans. It took everyday items and made them iconic. The core message? Art belongs to everyone, and anything can be a subject. I started with a unique choice, a 19th century kabuki actor. These actors were the celebrities of their time, and I was really drawn to his exaggerated expression. It already felt dramatic and larger than life. So instead of treating him like a historical figure, I decided to appropriate him as a modern-day brand mascot, which felt like a very pop art thing to do. My idea was to make him the face of Hata, a classic Japanese soda that screams summer and nostalgia. I placed the bottle in his right hand, but this part took way longer than I expected, because I had to carefully mask around each finger to make it look like he's actually holding it, instead of the bottle awkwardly sitting on top. It's one of those small details that you don't notice at first, but if it's wrong, the whole image feels off. To lean into the pop aesthetic, I used one of the most famous Japanese artworks in history, Hokusai's Great Wave. I used the Flirt Select tool to select out the image, and then refined it with the lasso tool, because the edges were pretty rough, and I didn't want it to look sloppy. I chose this wave not just because it's recognizable, it also visually reinforces the idea of refreshment and summer beaches, which ties back to the drink. I painted over the eyes and repainted them, so he's actually looking at the drink with his comical expression, which makes the visual more immersive. This small change made a huge difference because now it feels more intentional, like he's interacting with the product, instead of it just floating in the composition. I added retro halftone dots and vibrant speed lines to make the marble look like it's flying, and bold speech bubbles to give it that 1960s comic vibe. At this point, it was really just pushing the energy of the design as far as I could, because pop art is meant to be loud and attention-grabbing, and honestly, that contrast is what makes it interesting. The result is this weird vibrant clash between 19th century tradition and 20th century consumerism. The philosophy of psychedelic design is visualizing the inner mind, inspired by the hallucinatory experiences of the 60s. It's meant to be vibrant, trippy, and overwhelming. The characteristics of this style is its intense color contrast and swirling patterns that create a trippy hypnotic effect. It's known for its illegible typography, where letters often distort to fit into shapes. It uses surreal imagery where dreamlike or collage visuals reflect altered states of mind. I began by selecting out this skull using the lasso tool, and my idea for this poster is to represent someone's mind in an altered state, as if they're immersed in a dream. The fact that this is an X-ray of a skull already made it feel a bit unsettling, which gave me a strong starting point. I then selected this image of a mask that depicts the demon called the Hanya, where it would be perfect to symbolize that transition from human to something more spiritual or distorted. The initial selection was pretty messy, so I had to go back with the lasso tool to refine the edges, because if I left it pixelated, it would ruin the overall look later. After that was done, I began to experiment with composition. I placed the mask over the skull and adjusted the blend modes, as my idea was to have them merge into one another instead of sitting as separate elements, because that visually represents the blending of reality and the spirit world. For the typography, I used the warp tool to distort the text into the shape of the skull, so it feels like it's a part of the brain itself rather than just sitting on top. I then used the liquefy tool to create a melting effect for the text, which is a style unique to psychedelic design. It says ukiyo-e, meaning floating world, which ties conceptually to the idea of being in a dreamlike state. After that, I worked on the border design by placing 4 circles at the corners and cropping them to create curved corners, which helped frame the composition. I chose a contrasting color scheme of neon purples for the trippy effect to push that intense, overwhelming feeling. I selected these wave patterns to add some texture to the background, recolored them cyan, and repeated the pattern across the background. I then cleaned up any excess parts because it started to get messy. I proceeded to warp the background text to curve around the main subject, stretching it to take up as much space as possible, and then use the liquefy again to melt the edges so it almost looks like fire. The text is a bright orange, which creates high contrast with the background that suits the clashing colors of psychedelic design, and readability wasn't really the goal anymore. It was more about creating a feeling. After the main image was done, I worked on the body text with the idea of making this poster for an ukiyo-e art exhibition. I used the Tempura Sans font as its groovy style adds to the psychedelic vibes. The final touch was adding the yokai around the composition, and I really struggled with this as I had to make sure the distribution was even around the canvas, so it wouldn't look imbalanced. This is the finished poster, and the final result is a neon, trippy composition that feels chaotic yet intentional, inviting you to the spirit world through art. Next up is Postmodernism, who is the rule breaker of design, making it the rebellious member of the design styles. It emerged in the 70s as a counter-movement to the rigid corporate perfection of Swiss style and modernism. Its philosophy is complexity and contradiction. There is no right way to design, rejecting the idea that form follows function. Instead, form follows fun, feeling, and ID. It values individual expression over objective communication. I started by typing out the phrase majide, which is a Japanese slang that means seriously, because I wanted something playful and expressive, which matches the postmodern philosophy. I made sure to position the type diagonally to create a sense of imbalance and dynamism. I then selected this famous ukiyo-e artwork of a kabuki actor, which you've probably seen everywhere, using the lasso tool to refine the edges because the selection wasn't clean. A characteristic of postmodern design is layering and collage, where it looks like a scrapbook. So I placed it on top of a paper texture and cropped it to follow the shape, which helped create that scrapbook feel. Then I selected this telephone, which was the most difficult part because of the curved wire. And I even had to use the clone stamp tool to repaint some parts, as the flirt select tool didn't do a good job. I selected these adorable cat statues as I felt they would add a light-hearted, playful feeling. And at this point, the composition felt really random and I wasn't sure where it was going. I started adding buildings like the Tokyo Tower, and it began to feel more like a city-based concept, like a travel theme design to advertise the city. I then added this ramen bowl to reinforce that Tokyo theme, as the city is known for its delicious ramen noodles. I chose a primary color palette of red, blue, and yellow because they're often used in postmodern design, and I wanted everything to feel loud and slightly chaotic. I used this Y2K style program window and a pixelated font to add some contrast with traditional Japanese elements to represent the fusion of the old and the new. This is the finished poster, and what started off as a random mess became something experimental with a lot of character. It reminds me of Japanese 90s magazines, which was exactly the direction I was hoping it would go in, even though I didn't plan it from the start. The next style is Art Deco, which emerged in the early 20th century. Originating in France, it quickly spread worldwide, reaching its peak in the 1920s. It's the embodiment of luxury, glamour, and exuberance of the Roaring Twenties. Art Deco posters were popular for advertising, where they had illustrations of fashionable figures and travel destinations. My idea for this poster was to create a fashion-inspired scene of a couple standing on a bridge under a wisteria cove, something that feels refined and cinematic. The wisteria is a native Japanese flower, known for its elegance, beautiful violet hues, and fragrant qualities. It is associated with good luck, love, and longevity. I created the bridge first using the vector shape tools and started with the poles on the sides. I made sure to add rounded curves and shapes to give it an organic design, which is the feature of Art Deco. I then used the rectangle and circle tool to create an arch ceiling for smooth curves. After the background was done, I moved on to the characters, using the pen tool to trace my sketch. The lady over here has a 1920s flapper hairstyle, and I made her thin and slender, which was the style of figure drawings back then. This was where things started to slow down. Creating their proportions, adjusting their poses, and refining the details took a lot of back and forth, because small changes made a big difference in how elegant they look. For her clothing, she's wearing a furisode, which is a kimono with long sleeves and is worn by young women in their early 20s. I struggled with the sleeves because they were in different perspectives, which made it harder to balance. I used the shape builder tool to clean things up, but it was a very iterative process. For the male character's face, I adjusted the nodes of the oval to give him a more masculine facial structure, and to get the hair to look right still took a lot of tweaking. For his clothing, he's wearing a classic black suit with a bow tie, and for their facial features, I gave them thin eyebrows and slender features, which was the ideal beauty standard. My main inspirations are the artworks of George Barbier, who is my favorite artist from the 1920s, although I didn't manage to exactly capture his style. I vectorized the wisteria flowers using the image trace tool to save time, but cleaning them up was still quite tedious. I eventually exported them as PNGs, which allows me to create copies of the flowers to avoid overloading my file with too many vector layers, which was honestly a bit of a workaround because I was worried the file might crash. I then arranged them hanging down from the ceiling, mirroring both sides for a symmetrical design to create balance and symmetry. This is a key aspect of Art Deco, which emphasizes orderly and harmonious compositions. After adding the headline, the idea to make this a Vogue fashion poster was the perfect concept. I really struggled with the border design, despite using an existing vector, as I had to deconstruct and adjust it symmetrically in my composition without obstructing any elements. The most frustrating part was coloring. I didn't realize my shapes weren't closed, so I couldn't fill them properly, which meant I had to go back and fix everything by closing all the open paths. That part alone took hours and was probably the most frustrating moment in this entire challenge. But once it worked, adding gradients and metallic tones finally brought the design to life. I gave the bridge a gold gradient to make the atmosphere more luxurious, and the poster is complete. Personally, I don't think this poster fully lived up to my vision, but it was also my first time doing this kind of vector work using the shape builder tool. It was a learning experience more than anything, as it was the most challenging poster of them all. The last design style is the Victorian style, which was popular from 1837 to 1901. It was born out of the Industrial Revolution. celebrating the ability to mass-produce items for the public. Victorian style design was defined by complexity and heavy ornamentation. There is even a term for it called horror factory, the fear of empty space, where every inch of the page must be filled with beautiful designs. My idea for this poster is an advertisement for a rice wine brand called Deco, as I felt like the Victorian aesthetic matched its long history and tradition. The brand was founded by Jiemon Okura in 1637, which was one of the oldest and most revered sake breweries in Japan. The company's history is deeply rooted in the region's rich tradition of sake brewing, which began after rice cultivation was introduced from China. Over the centuries, Gekkeikan has mastered brewing techniques and increased the popularity of sake. The brand name Gekkeikan, which means crown of laurel, was chosen in 1905 as it embodied the company's commitment to excellence. I started with the central image of a sake bottle and masked it out. I used the Time on Path tool to create the text around the circle, and used this decorative border to establish that ornate look. I added some laurel vectors into the main composition, which gave me the design direction of using flora and fauna in my design. To add some Victorian aesthetics, I masked out an image of this scroll and laid elements like ornate and floral designs, making the composition more dense. I added rice stalks to connect to the brand's origins, and some foxes holding sides, as white foxes represent the Shinto god Inari, who is the deity of rice cultivation. I used a vintage paper texture to give it that aged look, and added some native flowers like the chrysanthemum and sakura. After hours of tweaking the composition, the challenge shifted from adding more details to making everything feel balanced and symmetrical. The last poster is finally complete, with the lino print elements and the old paper giving it that aged look. This style was challenging because it required both creativity and control, but I think that the final result captures that decorative Victorian feel. The 10 posters, 10 design styles challenge is finally complete. It was a lot more difficult than I expected, but it pushed me to step out of my comfort zone and experiment in ways I normally wouldn't. I still don't know my creative identity yet, but I can start to see parts of it in how I approach each style. If you like this video, feel free to give it a like, as it really helps the channel. And comment below which poster was your favorite. I'll see you in the next one.